Good morning for those joining. We're going to give a few minutes for letting everyone to hop on, and then we'll get started. For those of you filtering in, good morning. We're going to get started just in here a few minutes. We're going to allow about one more minute for everyone else to join, and then we'll get started. Okay. All right, we're going to give it about 30 more seconds, and then we'll get started, guys. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, guys. Just for a quick introduction, my name is Aiden Harvey. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Alliances here at Registrar Corp. We're really excited to host this and make sure everyone's up to date and adapting to change and navigating the FDA through Registrar Corp and making sure that everyone is aware of what is going on right now and how we can support. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce Ms. Coley Anderson, and she can get everything started.
Thank you, Aiden. I am so thrilled to be here and thrilled to be partnering with the Ministry of Economic Affairs in the Bahamas. As you mentioned, I'll be presenting today on FDA regulations, food and cosmetic. But before we begin, I would like to introduce Brickle Pender from the Ministry of Economic Affairs. She is the trade director there, and we're going to take a few moments and hear from Brickle. Brickle?
Hey, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on the U.S. Food and Drug Administration regulations for food and cosmetics, facilitated by Registrar Corp. The national trade policy adopted by the government of the Bahamas in 2023 provides the framework on how the Bahamas will engage on international trade. One of the objectives of the policy is to diversify trade. This webinar is a deliberate step to provide relevant information to micro and small enterprises to help them engage in international trade. I'd like to thank Registrar Corp and Coley Anderson for partnering with us, the staff of the Trade and Industry Unit, and all of you for joining us this morning. With those brief remarks, I hand over to Coley and our facilitator, Aiden Harvey. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brickle. That was very, very important to state, because I tell you, one thing I will say is the number one reason, I travel all over the world giving these seminars on FDA, and the number one reason why people don't export to the United States is because they fear FDA regulation. So not only am I a self-proclaimed trade nerd who loves diving into the international commerce, I'm also a Registrar Corp employee, which this is what we do. We try to make FDA regulations streamlined and easy. But even more so today is extremely meaningful to me, this webinar, because I'm a proud Bahamian American. And so my family, who originates out of Cat Island, and so therefore this means a lot to me, not only on the levels of just opening the doors to any country to their understanding of the FDA regulations, but it is the Bahamas. So I'm welcoming everybody that's here, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you on these regulations. So let's dive in. So on our agenda today, we're going to talk about the impact of change on FDA regulations. I think we all are aware that things are happening out there between the tariffs and all the different changes with the administration. with a lot of our government agencies. People are unsure of what to expect when they export to the US. So we're going to talk about updates on the FDA regulations for food, as well as cosmetic. And we'll be talking about the manufacturer and the importer side on both. Then we'll take some time afterwards for questions and answers. So first of all, what is the impact on the new administration and what is really happening in the United States? Well, FSMA 204, if you haven't heard about it, it's a traceability rule where the goal here is to improve food safety by improving traceability across the supply chain. And FDA put this out there because they really wanted to attack or target a lot of the high-risk foods that were causing issues. And the goal was to enable faster identification and removal of these potentially dangerous foods when they are contaminated. So the FSMA 204, great idea, an integral part of FSMA, but it's delayed to 2028. So if any of you were thinking about traceability and worrying about complying with it, it has been delayed. The new deadline is July 20th, 2028. Some more changes, the voluntary removal of synthetic food dyes. Again, this is a quick update, guys, and then we're going to dive into the regulations that are very specific to you as companies. But we at a high level, acknowledge some of the changes in our administration and our regulations. So the voluntary removal of synthetic food dyes, take a look at these. If you have these in your food products currently and you're planning on shipping or doing business in the United States, please begin to voluntarily remove them from your ingredients because more than likely it will become mandatory later on. There's also a shift in FDA inspections. A lot of people thought with a lot of the restructuring and the downsizing of FDA that the inspections would decrease. But all they've done, and they've been doing it for quite a while anyway, is augment some of the participants, meaning that FDA inspections are also being done by state authorities on the domestic side. But rest assured, there is no slowdown in the foreign inspections on the foreign side. We are seeing an increased focus, a transparency through U.S. importer regulations. FDA more than ever is able to inspect the foreign facilities, and they're staying on track with that. Lastly, GRAS under scrutiny. The elimination of self-affirmation pathway with GRAS. GRAS is generally recognized as safe ingredients where companies were allowed to self-affirm if their ingredient through testing was safe. FDA would now make GRAS determined by them, and that you would have to submit and go through a more lengthy process. So that's under consideration with our regulations. So if there's an ingredient that you want to bring to the US market, normally you could maybe self-affirm. Now you possibly cannot in the future. So that's some updates on the big picture of regulation changes, shifts in the FDA. So now let's dive into what do you need to know before exporting to the US? Okay, food facility registration. Most people consider this the most easiest thing to do, and it was for a while. Register with the FDA, one and done. That's the way it used to be. If you manufactured, if you processed, if you packed or stored or hold food for animal or human consumption, you must register your facility. Well, FDA took it to another level and said, hey, we need to make sure that they renew every 2 even years because companies change, their products change, their owners change, and there was no way to track that. So now the registration is not just one and done, but it's also every 2 even years. And it's been that way for a while, but it's important to note for those who have not been in the business for a while. Also, it requires US agent. So now it started adding layers of complexity to the registration, meaning that you register, you have to make sure you renew it every 2 years, but then also you have to have a designated US agent for FDA communication. Now, what does that mean? That means somebody in the United States must act as your US agent, your communication person with FDA if they have any questions on your product or your business. Now, this is not to be confused with your business partner, your customs broker, none of this, your importer. This is a name inside of your food facility registration that FDA can reach out to if they have concerns or questions regarding your product or they want to do an inspection. We always tell people when you choose your US agent, don't just choose a warm body in the United States. You know, I have a lot of people that either choose their cousin Eddie because Eddie's free and he lives in the United States. But if Eddie's out surfing and he misses the email from the FDA, that's a problem. I mean, your registration could be canceled. You could miss a critical communication from the FDA. So you do want to choose your U.S. agent wisely. You don't want it to be your cousin because he lives in the United States. I also discourage choosing your U.S. importer. You choose your U.S. importer, and if you break ties because of maybe a conflict with pricing or just business in general, you now have his name in your registration and he can cancel it. So you want to choose a U.S. agent that is unbiased. And that's why often people choose Registrar Corp, and we act as U.S. agent to over 30,000 companies around the world. Another layer that FDA added to the FDA registration is the DUNS number. Now, the DUNS number is the unique facility identifier. So what FDA said is, you know, with these facilities all over the world, you know, some of them, you know, the addresses are confusing. Finding them is difficult. And if you're going to go for inspection, you need to know where they are and what they're doing. So they designated the unique facility identifier where Dun & Bradstreet issues a DUNS number for a company, and then that confirms their location, confirms their activity, confirms their business. And so FDA knows that, you know, when you go to register, that you are a confirmed facility. So the important takeaway here is A, you designate a U.S. agent. B, you have to renew every 2 years. C, you have to have a UFI. And the only acceptable unique facility identifier right now is the Dun & Bradstreet DUNS number. And you do not get that from FDA. You get that directly from Dun & Bradstreet. And when Registrar Corp registers companies all over the world, we facilitate and assist with that process so that you don't have to be managing FDA and DUNS. We handle that for you as well. The important thing is, if you're planning on attending a trade show and you're ready to go and you're like, oh, I just need to register, keep in mind the DUNS number can take up to 45 days to obtain, and you can't complete that registration without it. So make sure that as you prepare for 2026 trade shows and getting your product into the United States, you're going to need to be registered, and it takes time. So contact us immediately if you need help. Now, exemptions on registration, super important to understand. I hear people all the time, they come to me and say, oh, I'm the brand. I'm the brand of the cookies out of UK. And I'm the investor out of the cakes out of, you know, Southern Africa. Do I need to register? Well, first of all, the registration follows the food. So if you are not manufacturing, if you are not processing, if you are not packaging, if you are not holding the food at that particular facility, your corporate office or your business, then you do not register. Everyone feels inclined to do so, but please do not register, because FDA gets a little upset when they fly all across you know, to another country and they get there and they're at a corporate office and there's no food. They're coming to inspect the processing, the packaging, the manufacturing, the storing, safety practices of food that's going to be sold in the United States. Other entities that don't need to register, trading companies. Again, there's no food. Personal residence, that's governed by your local entity. Transportation only does not need to register. Farms do not need to register unless they have an additional part to them where they are processing, packaging, or storing the food. So if they have a two-part where they're not just growers, then the farm needs to register. But just as growers, they do not need to register. Retail food establishments do not need to register. Fishing vessels do not need to register, and USDA regulated facilities do not need to register. Another thing that I hear when I'm at a trade show, it just jars my ears. And I mean, and it also speaks to how compliant and how aware you are of FDA regulations. And if I were a buyer, immediately when someone walks up to me and says, hey, you got to buy my product, my cookies have been FDA approved, I've got everything all organized. No, products, food and ingredients and food and facilities are not FDA approved. The only thing that's FDA approved in the food world are your food additives and your color additives. But your food and ingredients, your food facilities, your processes, you don't have an FDA approved facility. FDA sets out guidelines and you follow them. And when you break them, then there's the problem. You are FDA under violation. But please, please, as you go to these trade shows and you're speaking to buyers like Walmart, Target, TJ Maxx, Kroger, do not say my food is FDA approved. your food is FDA compliant, and your additives and food additives and color additives can be FDA approved. It's all in the language, and it's an implication of your knowledge and your awareness of FDA regulations and quite possibly the safety of your food. Next, Food Canning Establishment Registration, otherwise known as FCE. FCE SID is an additional registration that you have to have if you have food that is low acid or acidified foods. Commonly recognized and not, but you still have to look at the numbers. But if you have a food on a shelf and you take it off, and then once you open it, it has to be refrigerated, often this means you have an FCE product. That's a big indicator. Another big indicator is if your food is in a can, a jar, a Tetra Pak, you probably need an FCE SID. But the final determination boils down to your pH balance and your water activity. So those other things that we discussed are indicators. They're red flags to quite possibly you need an FCE, but once you do the math on the pH and the water activity, that's the final decision. So we see a lot of products coming into the United States, and they'll be in a jar, and they'll have no FCE SID registration. And FDA will stop them at the port and say, hey, where's your FCE? And the client's like, well, I don't think I need an FCE. And then nobody knows, because the big indicator is the jar, the can, or the Tetra Pak, but it's not the final decision. So FDA then will stop the product and do testing on it for the pH level and the water activity. And that's why Registrar Corp, when we know a client is shipping and they're shipping in cans, Tetra Paks, or jars, we do an immediate assessment of their pH balance and water activity and issue them a certificate of exclusion and saying that they don't need this. So when that product hits the port and FDA scratching their head going, gee, I don't know, this could be FCE, it's in a can, a Tetra Pak, or a jar, we immediately eliminate that by the client can show the certificate of exclusion because it says what the pH balance is in the water activity. So you might want to know, if you are shipping to the US in any of these forms, make sure that you have a certificate of exclusion, or you have done your due diligence on your water activity and pH balance to confirm if your product is FCE SID. The FCC is the Food Canning Establishment Registration, is on the facility. And then the SID, which is the submission identifier, is on your process. What we see a lot of is that somebody will register their facility as a food canning establishment. They will register one of their products for the submission identifier. Let's say it's an 8-ounce can. And then they have a 12-ounce can, and they ship the 8-ounce and the 12-ounce to the United States, but the 12-ounce doesn't have an SID on it. FDA requires each different size your product has an SID on it, so that, because the cooking time and the processing is very different because of the volume in the cans. So we have seen where companies have been stopped because they didn't have the SIDs on all of their different sizes of products that are listed under their FCE. So again, not to go too deep into that, we can always assist you with that. Registrar Corp helps with that. But the bottom line is, if you're in a Tetra Pak, can, or a jar, you have certain water activity or pH balance, you will need this additional registration called FCE. And that's in addition to your normal food facility registration. So U.S. food facility regulations for facilities. I mean, who is subject? Well, we talked about this. All foods are subject, other than the foods that are exempt. And that's the ones over here, which are the meat, the poultry, and the eggs. That's definitely USDA. You have your alcoholic beverages, that's under TTB. So then the rest of them are under FDA. Now, we talked about who must comply. Super important. I emphasize the registration follows the food. Manufacturing, processing, packaging, holding, you must register, you must comply. And so FDA is really clear about this. And so I want to make sure I drive this home too. I sat on a panel a few weeks ago with FDA, and they said it's just exhausting when they go visit facilities and there's no food. It's just a corporate office. So again, I reiterate, unless you manufacture, process, package, or hold, and I can't say this enough, do not register. Okay, another thing, labeling. Labeling is the #1 reason why products are stopped at the port. So let's begin your journey into the United States on a high note. and get the labeling correct. It's the easiest thing to fix. You can hire somebody, you can have it reviewed, review it yourself, but don't ship with a bad label. I mean, it's a bad start. You're on the FDA radar immediately, and you don't need to be. And then on a more serious level, as a part of the manufacturing process that FDA observes for compliance with our manufacturers and our processors and our packagers, the labeling is part of that process. It's one of the critical control points in bringing food to the US market. The label is part of that, and it could be adulterated, meaning that it's misbranded. If you don't communicate to your consumer properly in the proper format in the US label, that's a critical control point that can fail, meaning that you don't list the allergens. You're not clear about the fat and the sodium. FDA is very strict on this because this is your last opportunity after the manufacturing process to maintain food safety through this label. And if this critical control point breaks because you don't communicate properly with the FDA, with your consumers can literally be sick or die. Here I've laid out the US label as it compares to the other labels around the world. We have Bahamas here. So it's very obvious that when your product comes into the port, if it's not labeled properly, it stands out, as you can see, compared to the US label. Now let's take a deeper dive into the US label. What has changed? The label has changed over the last 5 years. Some people are aware of it. Some people are still struggling to comply, but it's all makes sense. When I explain it to people, they made the calorie count larger. Okay. So how many calories you're taking in. The United States has a big problem with heart disease and diabetes. So FDA was really, really critical in making sure that the calories are stated, the sugars are stated. And this label doesn't show it, but we now have it where you have the total sugars, which we've always had in a label, but then it makes the manufacturer declare the added sugars. The added sugars are important. So I used to go to trade shows and look at food and beverages, especially like these juices, and they would be super sweet, like high sugar levels, like 15, 18, 20. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. And they would always tell me, well, oh, it's high sugar, Coley, because it's a fruit juice. And I'd say, okay, that makes sense. Well, now you take that same fruit juice, run it through the new labeling, and you'll see total sugars, 20, okay, and then added sugars, 15. And you're going, not only is it the fruit, but you've added sugar. So that's super important. Some other changes FDA made was they eliminated vitamin C needing to be declared. You can declare it voluntarily, but they put potassium on the list. Potassium, for whatever reason in the United States, we're low in potassium. So they want to communicate to the consumer, hey, you buy this product, it's high in potassium. So be aware that the label is not taken lightly. The fonts are important. Serving sizes, FDA changed the general serving sizes for the United States. They recognize that, the potato chip manufacturer would give you a little small bag of potato chips, but say, oh, it's 2 servings. So they could divide the fat, the sugar, the calories in half. And so you felt good about eating that bag. FDA is saying no more. That one little bag of potato chips is 1 serving. And so all of that fat and all of that sugar should be recorded as 1 serving. So major changes like that have happened. And so you want to be cognizant of that in the label. Please have your label checked because, like I said, it stands out against other labels. And it's the #1 reason why labels are detained in the United States. I'm sorry, products are detained in the United States. And it's costly. So as I mentioned in the label as the last critical control point before it reaches the consumer, it is the opportunity that you can communicate allergens. And we all know allergens can be deadly. So you need to make sure that you let your consumer know that there's milk, there's eggs, there's fish. A lot of recalls, like top recalls, happen because somebody forgets to put an allergen ingredient note in their nutritional facts panel or their ingredient list. So super important that you recognize that in the United States, we have 9 major food allergens. Pretty sure it's the same around the world, and they need to be declared. And minus that, you're probably going to get a recall on your product. And again, you don't want that. Other things you want to consider is during the labeling process, you make claims. You want to be multilingual and organic. And under all of those things, there's some type of requirement that you have to follow. And you have to be careful with your claims, because if you make claims, it could make it a drug. If it's multilingual, you need to make sure that if you're doing it in English and partly in Spanish, it can't be part Spanish. It's got to be all Spanish, all English. Everything must be disclosed in the foreign language. You can't do half of it in Spanish and all of it in English. Same thing with organic. You need to really be cognizant of the fact that needs to be a USDA certification in order to say that you're organic. And all of that has to do with the percentage of organic ingredients in your product. So some major things to avoid in your, labeling and your ingredients when you're bringing product. A lot of companies do not pre-check their ingredients. I cannot emphasize enough, check your ingredients. And that's another service Registrar Corp has, where we can not only review your label, but we can review your ingredients, because what's compliant or allowed in other countries may not be allowed here in the United States. So we don't want that. Illegal colors must be approved by FDA. And if they're illegal, then they will not be able to be entered into the United States. Colors allowed elsewhere, like the Ponceau and the Carmeswine, and I don't know if I'm even pronouncing it correctly, but they are not allowed in the United States. And then there has to be batch certifications. You get batch certificates. FDA samples synthetic colors like Allura and Brilliant Blue to make sure that they are following and have the proper chemical makeup of what they should have, and the purity of those particular products. So make sure that that is happening. And again, if you need assistance, ask for it, because these are the biggest mistakes that are made that you could really mitigate if you just asked for assistance. Again, FDA bans FD&C red number 3. Okay, take note now. If you have this in your product, remove it. Super important. FDA is revoking its authorization for food effective January 15th. You cannot have this colorant in any food products. So we really encourage people to remove it now. Lots of candies, lots of sweets, lots of products have it, and it's very common. They are removing it. And then also they announced new measures regarding the colors, working with the industry. They want to work with the industry. We need to phase out the petroleum-based dyes. They're going to revoke the authorization on orange bee and citrus. So just kind of going through this, I won't read it through to you, but as you can see here, if you recognize any of these ingredients in your product, please go ahead and start the process of removing them. So when we look at the Bahamas, again, super excited. Looked at some reports from 2023 top FDA regulated products that are exporting out of the Bahamas. We got fish, seafood preparations, fruits, nuts, vegetables. We've got beverages and spirits and vinegar, coffee, tea, mate. So lots of exciting products, and there could be so many more coming from the Bahamas. And I think that, again, and I talked to Brickle a few weeks ago when I was in her office, and I said the number one reason is people fear that first step to understanding what they need to do. And that's what this is all about. Talking to you about, let's mitigate the fear. Let's take it step by step by step. We talked about registrations, the type of registrations you need, and we will attack it one by one and get it done. Okay, so foreign exporters, be U.S. market ready. So in summary, before we continue, food safety documents. Your U.S. buyer will be expecting to collect food safety documents from you. They want to see your food facility registration. A lot of people say, well, should we register? We're not doing business in the United States yet, but we're looking for business. I say, if you're serious, get registered, because that's your calling card to your U.S. buyer, like a Walmart. I'm saying, look, we're ready. We're FDA compliant. And keep in mind, when you register, you're automatically welcoming FDA or inviting FDA to your facility to say, come and inspect me. So the moment you register, you're on the radar and they can come and inspect you. So I have to give that caveat. But that shows your U.S. buyer that you're serious. So these are the type of things you want to have ready: the registration, a compliant label, and establish if you have an FSBP agent or an importer. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about that after this, But the FSVP agent is if you don't have a U.S. importer, and if you have a U.S. importer, you want to make sure you understand what your requirements are if you have one and if you don't have one. And FSVP stands for Foreign Supplier Verification Program. Now, I know I'm giving you a lot of information, and I'm hoping that it's kind of sinking in, but the good news is after this webinar, Registrar Corp does not go away. You have questions, I'm here, and we have a whole team of people that can answer them, and we will be giving you a copy of the recording as long as you register, after the webinar. Okay, so also they'll be looking for, your U.S. buyer is going to be looking for product-specific regulations to be followed, like the FCE, SID we talked about, or if you're seafood, HACCP, and so on. So this is kind of in big picture what you're going to want to have all ready to go once you turn your view to the United States for that market. Now, another thing that's important is prior notice. Now that you've got your product totally FDA compliant, you're like, okay, great, what's next? Well, you have to give notification to the FDA that you're sending your product there. Back in the day, products would arrive to the US port and just sit there. In the port, at the border, nobody knew what it was. Well, in the age of bioterrorism, FDA said enough is enough. We want prior notice that your product is coming to the United States. And in this document, your US importer, your customs broker, your logistics person will fill this out for you, or it could be you. But always confirm that it's being done, that somebody is doing it. And in this document, it's going to put the foreign exporter, the US importer that's going to be receiving the document, the product. It's going to talk about the products themselves and the risk level of them. And so through this prior notice, FDA will get this notification and put it into their system called the Predict data software. And they will determine if this is a high-risk shipment or if this shipment needs further inspection upon arrival at the US port. Without the prior notice, there's a problem. If you come to the port and there's no notice given, all kinds of things can happen, detentions, refusals. So it's super important that the prior notice is done. And as a foreign entity, check with your customs broker, check with your US importer. Who's filling out my my prior notice, please? Confirm that that's being done. Very important to be done. So we were talking about FSVP before, Foreign Supplier Verification Program. Your US importer, 51% of them have failed their FSVP audit last year. Now, why do you care as a foreign exporter? That's a seemingly US importer requirement. Why does the foreign exporter care? Well, because what the US importer cares about, the foreign exporter must care about. You must know the US importer expectations. You must understand them because they will fall on you. So the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, what is it? Well, FDA said, hey, we have all of this food coming into the United States and no, we can't check it all. FDA cannot check everything at the port or the border. So they leaned onto the US importer and said, we're going to give some responsibility to you. It's because of you the food is entering this country. So we're going to ask that you do some due diligence on the foreign supplier. And that's what FDA did. They created FSVP and they said, US importer, you must check your foreign exporter. And so therefore, what you see over here is if the US importer agrees to purchase the product before it leaves the foreign country, if the US importer owns it at the time of entry, or if they're the ultimate consignee, they are the FSVP importer and they have the FSVP requirements. And they will be looking to the foreign exporter to collect documents and to verify your FDA compliance. And that is why the foreign exporter cares about this. The other reason why the foreign exporter cares about FSVP, and again, FSVP stands for Foreign Supplier Verification Program. Okay, the reason why the foreign exporter cares about this, not only because you have to be ready to meet the expectation and the due diligence of the US importer, but you also have to realize if you have no US importer and you're shipping to a trade show, to a warehouse, now you have this requirement, but you can't check yourself. So you have to hire a company to be your FSVP agent. If you do not have a US importer, the foreign exporter is responsible for FSVP, confirming with FDA that they are compliant, they process this food in a compliant way, and so therefore they must hire an FSVP agent. Okay, so this is really, really important. And that's why the Foreign Supplier Verification Program is important not only to the US importer, but in the absence that you do not have a US importer as a foreign exporter, then you need to hire somebody to be your FSVP agent. And what will that FSVP agent do? The FSVP agent will be responsible for collecting food safety documents from you. So the moment that you plan to ship to Fancy Food, Supply Side West, Natural Products Trade Show, or maybe even that you're sending over samples to the United States, you must engage in you must comply with FSVP by engaging an FSVP agent, somebody that will collect your food safety documents from the Bahamas, review your food safety documents. And when I say food safety documents, I'm talking about process flow charts. I'm talking about HACCP plans. I'm talking about your labels. This person will review everything for you, and then they will write a plan that says this facility is FDA compliant. And then if there's any issues where they feel like there could be a gap in compliance, they will ask you to take corrective actions. Again, this is your FSVP agent doing this for you. And FDA requires either the FSVP agent does it for you, that's somebody you hire, or if you have a US importer, the FSVP importer will do it for you. Okay? And this is what they're doing. So be prepared for, again, if you're going to a trade show, give yourself at least a month or two to prepare for this, because not only did we talk about almost 45 days to get your DUNS number and your registration, but you also have to have this done, the FSVP written. Either it's going to be done by your US importer, but in the absence of the US importer, because you don't have one like a Walmart or Target, then you need to hire an FSVP agent to do this for your company and verify that you are FDA compliant. Negative impacts. Again, a lot of the negative impacts are on the US importer side, but obviously indirectly it affects the foreign exporter. So that's why I always try to educate my foreign exporter on what FDA expects, because you can remind there, you'd be surprised how many US importers sometimes are not even aware of FSVP or choose not to follow it. Well, if you know that your product can be import refused, and there could be violations that you could be put on import alert, a lot of different things can happen. We had a situation where we had a major importer that did not develop their FSVPs, and they were bringing in product from, I think it was either Malaysia or Indonesia. And FDA had inspected them once, no FSVPs. Inspected them twice, no FSVPs. Well, they had the 2 large shipments on the water coming in, and they already had a shipment in the port. And FDA import refused them or gave them the option to destroy the product because they had no FSVPs confirming the food safety of that product coming from that foreign exporter. And I don't think any of you guys would want, your ultimate goal is, to have your product enter US commerce, be successful, gain recognition, have a good brand. So you want to make sure that your US importer is doing this. Okay, so now we're going to skip along to cosmetics. This is a major, we call this MOCRA, the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act. Big, really big, because for the longest time, FDA did not require that cosmetics register. And I never really understood that. I mean, especially as a female using cosmetics. And we have cosmetics on everything, right? A male, female, we have the deodorants, we have everything. And so I really feel that this is a long time coming and should happen. So before, cosmetic companies did not need to register with FDA. It wasn't required. It was voluntary. And again, never understood that, because I understand in the food world, if you register with the FDA, then you open yourself up for inspection. Well, without these mandatory registrations on the cosmetic side, how many cosmetic companies were actually getting inspected and they were actually being checked for FDA compliance? So I'm super happy, and I know a lot of people are not, that we are now required to do this. Now, who must register with FDA in the cosmetic world? And that's if you manufacture or process final formulations of cosmetic ingredients. Even if it's a final formulation of a single ingredient, you must register. Laboratories doing batch testing must register. So super important to acknowledge that. And then secondly, important to say that all of these registrations, usually if they're foreign, whether they're food or cosmetic, require a US agent. And again, FDA doesn't want to have to call Africa or China or the Bahamas to ask a question. They want to call the US agent and ask their question. And again, I reiterate, always choose a US agent that is knowledgeable in the FDA regulations and they're aware of what's going on, because you want someone, it's kind of like with your taxes. You don't want the US agent speaking to your tax man saying all the wrong things. Same thing in the food and the cosmetic world. You want a US agent that's knowledgeable, will say the right things to the FDA, and then communicate with you immediately about what you need to do. Also, we have product listings, and this is the responsible party will need to obtain the relevant facility registrations and list the product. And the responsible party is the manufacturer, the packer, or the distributor whose name appears on the label. That is important to reiterate. The name that appears on the label is the responsible party, and the responsible party, that's food, responsible person in the cosmetic world. And that responsible person in their product listings will include things like the product ingredient, the facility name and location, the product labeling, the responsible party contact information. FDA wants the consumer to be able to contact and state anything that's going on with that product and communicate, so that we're always aware if the product has any issues that need to be addressed. If the facility is a small business, they are exempt from the registration and have no facility registration number, then the facility's name and address can be provided in that listing. Now, there are small business exemptions, and I think this is obviously a good thing, because as a small business, a lot of times it's hard for you to pay for the compliance. FDA recommends implicit price deflator for GDP. Not really sure how that works. I don't deep dive. We have a whole team of people that understand that at Registrar Corp. But there are some areas where you're not exempt from high risk products like eye makeup remover, liquid, or mucosal eyeliner, or false eyelash adhesives. These are examples where because it becomes in contact with your mucous membrane, it's a high risk product. And FDA says you're not going to be exempt from that. You need to still produce the information that we need to make sure that product is safe. MOCR imposes new labeling requirements. I'm not going to go deeply into that. We're getting on a time crunch here, but it's basically the professional use labeling, the adverse event contact declaration, and the fragrance allergen declaration. So we're going to be a high level on this, kind of touch base with a professional. Under MOCR means an individual who's licensed by an official state authority. And the professionals use products must comply with the labeling as it states for the professional labeling. And if you need assistance with that, we can help with that. But FDA has clearly put professional use products now are subject to consumer labeling requirements, whereas they were not before. Adverse event. By the end of 2024, labels now had to include contact information where the consumer could submit an adverse event report. Now, this is critical. FDA is really strong on this. It has to be a domestic US address. You know, if I use a cosmetic, I could kind of give an example. You know, I was using a matte lipstick for a long time, and when I would give seminars, I would lick my lips while presenting, and I would get like a dry, like cotton mouth. And let's just say it went a step further where I then experienced a allergic reaction, or like my throat closed. I mean, that would be an example of an adverse event that needs to be recorded. And I need to be able to go to my lipstick container, see the domestic US address, file my complaint, and let them know this is a serious adverse event and they need to do something about it. And the cosmetic company will have to respond within 15 days. Fragrance allergen disclosure, it's coming soon. It was scheduled for October 24th. October 2024. Still, the rule has not been published. The details are not published, but stay tuned. There is going to be an allergen disclosure that's super important for people to be aware of and understand what you need to do on the allergen side for the cosmetics. Clearly defined on the food side, but not so much on the cosmetic side. Now, FDA, and again, going back to the adverse event reporting system, super important. So if you have a cosmetic product and you have your contact details on there and it has to be US based, then a consumer should be able to reach out and and list their adverse event report. And therefore, FDA keeps a dashboard in real time of these different reports, and so you can kind of track those. And that's all I have for you. And I think I finished up right 45 after the hour, and I am open for any questions.
Fantastic, Coley. Firstly, while we wait for any questions to come in, maybe it'd be helpful to hear about, since we were just talking about cosmetics, some of the success stories we've heard, at least, coming out that you work with in this last year. There's a lot changed in this industry, especially in the last year. So I'd love to hear any specific examples you have of clients you work with, or things that you just highlighted that we can, give an example of.
Well, that's a great question, Aiden. And normally I would have some really great examples. We do work with some pretty big brands in Europe, Louis Vuitton, their cosmetics, and a lot of different cosmetic companies where we've helped them streamline their work with, especially with the product listings. Product listings are very tedious. You have to list registrations. It's a lot of work. So Registrar Corp usually can step in and streamline that. A lot of companies outsource to us. But the majority of my work is done in the food area. We have teams that focus on the cosmetic. So I wouldn't be able to give you exact details other than what I understand company-wide, who our new clients are. We work with all of the major brands. And just because, a lot of people think that you only need help if you're a small or mid-sized business cosmetic, but no, even the big guys need help, because these are filings. These are listings that have to be upkept and updated often, and they have other things to do. So I guess the biggest success story I can tell you is that by engaging us, we streamline and mitigate non-compliance possibilities and violations.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, really appreciate it, Coley. And for everyone that joined, really appreciate your time. What I'd encourage you to do is to take the survey that comes in right after. It helps us as well as, it gives a lot of information about how we can make these better and how we can give you guys information as well about what just happened. And not only that, but you'll get the recording after. And of course, this will be available on our YouTube channel as well, which is in the chat.
Thank you, Aiden. I also want to highlight and point, I just realized in this last slide, it doesn't have my email address. Brickle does have it. So if any of you guys want to reach out to Brickle, she can give it to you. But just to let you know here, it's canderson@registrarcorp.com. It looks like Canderson@registrarcorp.com. I also want to encourage you guys to reach out, because we have an agreement with the ministry that we will give 15% discount on all of our pricing. And as you prepare for the new year, I know fancy food is coming up in January, February. We've got natural products coming up in March and April of 2026. Get your business US FDA market ready, so we can start your registrations. We can get your labeling reviewed. Give yourself time. So if you start now, you're under less pressure. You can, if you want to, spread the money out and make sure that you're doing one thing here, one each month, getting something accomplished. And then once it's done, you're US FDA market ready. You can ship to any of these trade shows without a problem. I can tell you, Aiden, I've been at many trade shows where the booths are empty. And I'm like, where's the product? And they're like, it's stuck at the port. It's stuck at the border, because people thought samples didn't need to be label compliant, registered with the FDA.
Absolutely. And that's really important to say, because I can imagine a lot of people that are on this call will want to be at those same trade shows, right, to see those same products, if not exhibit at them. So absolutely. That's a great point to make, Coley.
Yeah. And one thing about Registrar Corp I'll really point out is that we will take you from A to Z. Like I said, I've sat in Brickle's office. I've told her how passionate we are about this, and for many reasons. I mean, it is our goal as a company, it's our core mission statement to mitigate the confusion of bringing any product from anywhere in the world. And then I also, like I said at the beginning of this, I have a personal passion for this. So I want any company on this, attendee list or in the invite list or that's viewing today, feel comfortable reaching out. We will help you and make this easy for you. And we're excited to see your products on the US shelves.
Absolutely.
That's all I have for you.
Really happy I was able to join, and thank you, Coley, and thank you, Brickle, as well. Really appreciate your time and giving us the platform to be able to give information to everyone on the call right now. So Coley, really appreciate it. Brickle, thank you so much.
Thank you. Everyone have a wonderful rest of the day.
Have a great day, guys.